power right at the start of the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown's address at the end of the G20 summit. One thing that he was very specific about was what he described as the end of the Washington consensus. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Old Washington consensus is over. Today we have reached a new consensus that we take global action together to deal with the problems we face, that we will do what is necessary to restore growth and jobs. We will take essential action to rebuild confidence and trust in our financial system and to prevent a crisis such as this ever happening again.
Gordon Brown speaking a little earlier. Well, let's get more now from Washington, D.C. And Korok Ray, he's an economist with Georgetown University. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for being with us. How are economists, broadly speaking, in the US reacting to what the G20 have come up with today?
Hi, Felicity. Thanks for having me on the show. I think the upshot of the G20 was generally good. For example, I believe France and Germany I applaud them for justifiably being critical of expanded stimulus. And I think the general focus on financial regulation resonates with most economists, and that was a step in the right direction. I do believe some of the details need to be re-examined and fleshed out further. For example, I think focusing excessively on hedge funds is a little bit of a sideshow, because I think the action is really in the banking sector, not so much in the hedge funds. Those are more the details of the plan, but I think generally we were happy that there was broad consensus reached.
You're saying that any idea of having a global stimulus package would have been a bad idea. Of course, the US and China, for example, went to the G20 summit hoping that that was what they were going to get, that other countries were going to say, well, we're going to match what you're doing and we're going to try and spend our way out of the recession. Is there not a danger, as some economists are saying, that countries like the US, like China, who have been spending and trying to find a way out of their recession by opening their wallets, if you like, they're going to move towards more protectionist measures? They won't do it publicly and say that's what they're doing, but they're going to start pulling the borders around themselves and looking after their own people. Is that not a danger?
Yeah, I think that's one danger. There are two main dangers from excessive stimulus, which is verified by a lot of macroeconomic research over the last 30 years. The first is that, in my view, I think the research is still inconclusive about whether expenditure-based stimulus, which is spending, is really good for the economy, because there are a lot of effects that come from stimulus, such as crowding out private investment, raising taxes in the future, increasing the deficit. These are things that are very controversial and not at all agreed upon. I also think that the shift towards more protectionism is a mistake, and raising tariffs and barriers to trade would be a step backward. So I applaud, as I said, I applaud France and Germany for effectively pushing the rest of the world to shift focus onto financial regulation and away from macroeconomic stimulus.
Who will benefit most, though, from these increased regulations? Is it going to be what they describe as the middle economies, the economies such as Germany and France, or what about the less developed nations? Are they going to benefit from that? Are the countries in Africa going to benefit from greater regulation?
I think it's a little hard to say exactly who's going to benefit, given that the world is so interconnected. These regulations, which will probably be coordinated across different countries, will affect financial institutions everywhere. And because capital is extremely mobile, that means that all countries will be affected by the new regulations. I don't know if you can say which countries will be affected more than others. I think what you can say is that this will probably reduce the volatility in GDP around the world. That means it will constrain the upside, but also cushion the downside.
All right, Korok, we must leave it there. Thank you so much for your time joining us there from Washington, D.C. Police in Mexico have arrested one of its most wanted drug suspects, the alleged second in command of the powerful Juarez cartel. 32-year-old Vicente Carrillo is accused of controlling numerous drug trafficking routes into the US and money laundering. He was arrested in the early hours of Wednesday and then paraded in front of journalists. Our correspondent Frank Contreras has the latest.
Well, this is a major blow to one of Mexico's most powerful drug trafficking organizations, known as the Juarez cartel. Now, the cartel has been run for years and years now, since the 1980s, really, by the Carrillo Fuentes family. This young man belongs to that family. This man belongs to that family and was, as you said, second in charge, basically in charge of the movement of tons and tons of mostly cocaine, but also heroin, methamphetamines, and marijuana as well. Now, the Juarez cartel, of course, is the location of, is based in the northern sea of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and that, of course, has been the epicenter of the drug violence here in Mexico.
Taking now to Pakistan, where the bloody violence in the Swat Valley has decreased since Sharia or Islamic law was introduced in the area. It follows a deal with the local Taliban, but as Zaina Hodder reports, that fragile peace is not proving to be enough to entice back those who fled the fighting in the first place.
A disturbing reminder of the consequences of war. This woman shows us two of her grandchildren who were severely burned when their house came under fire in the Swat Valley. Even though the guns have now fallen silent and a peace deal reached, many families who fled the fighting between the Taliban and Pakistani forces are not returning home anytime soon.
I want to go back, but I have to stay in this camp because our house was destroyed and all our belongings stolen. We have nothing to return to.
A story we hear time and time again in this refugee camp. The displaced from Swat are also too scared to return to an area where they believe the Taliban are still in charge. The February deal involved a halt to the fighting in exchange for the introduction of Islamic law.
We are not against Islamic law, but the Taliban are putting too many restrictions on emails and we won't be allowed to go to school.
This camp also houses thousands of internally displaced from the Bajor agency, where a ceasefire has been in place for weeks now.
Many people here have no faith in the peace agreement that were signed between the Pakistani government and the Taliban. No faith because peace deals have been signed in the past and they never lasted.
Something Naiz knows all too well. He prefers to survive on what little assists he receives from the United Nations instead of returning home. Bajor is on the Afghan border and lies within Pakistan's tribal areas. Deals struck in the past between the authorities and the tribes of Bajor have been violated by both sides. And he say any lull in the fighting only allows the Taliban to grow stronger.
They've made agreements twice before in Bajor, but those deals fell apart. And what peace agreements are they talking about? This is all drama.
No one here is against political solutions to the violence in the northwest. They want the ongoing conflict to end so they can return home. For now, however, most of these displaced Pakistanis prefer to live as refugees in their own country because they don't believe the latest deals have brought permanent peace to their region. Zaina Hodder, Al Jazeera, Peshawar.
So then, under new international regulations, the world's banks may find themselves with somewhat less room to manoeuvre. G20 leaders hope the measures will help avoid another global crisis from happening. Nasim Mashiri has been speaking to bankers in the financial capital of Europe. That's Canary Wharf.
Derek Allgood's a banker in the financial heart of London. He works for Barclays, one of Britain's biggest institutions. He agrees with the G20 plans.
I think tighter regulation is part of it. I'm a bit concerned about all the debt that's being amassed to infuse money into the economy, but I think it's going to take a combination of both.
Derek's bank is just one of many based here in Canary Wharf, all within sight of the G20 summit. Banks which will be cleaned up under new international rules.
It's the people here who will be directly affected by the decisions of the G20 leaders. They've been partly blamed for the global recession, and now it seems the politicians need to clamp down on the way they operate.
The British Prime Minister wants that clampdown to include pay.
We will implement new rules on pay and bonuses at a global level that reflect actual performance with no more